아이들 재단의 최하나입니다. 2022년 평창 포럼.
My name is Choi Hyun-ha from the Heights Jaide Foundation. We are at the session on climate cooperation on the Korean Peninsula with International Network. We have speakers here and also participants. Thank you very much. I also thank our online participants. We'll be talking about how we can cooperate on the climate issue on the Korean Peninsula, and I do believe that we will be able to share diverse views. As you know, we are faced with the climate change issue. There's the bird flu, the swine flu, and the COVID-19 pandemic. And through these events, we could realize once again that North and South Korea have a joint destiny. We are intertwined together. And also, we also have to work with the global community in order to overcome these environmental challenges and also social and economic challenges as well. So against this backdrop, during this session, we will be talking about how we can jointly respond to environmental issues on the Korean Peninsula, how we can cooperate in terms of technology, how we can tackle environmental issues, diagnose these issues, and cooperate throughout the Korean Peninsula and beyond. So we will be talking about climate cooperation, also how we can go beyond this region and engage in global cooperation. To discuss this matter, we have invited 4 guests, and we will listen to presentations and go on to panel discussions. So everyone here at the venue and also those participating online, we ask for your active participation. Let me introduce our speakers first. First, from URACCESS Korea, country representative, Mr. Thomas Wierzbowski. Dr. Wierzbowski is here. Please give him a big round of applause. And next, we have with us from Korea University, Ojang Resilience Institute at Korea, research professor Dr. Song-Chul Ho. Third, we have with us from Kookmin University, Professor Im Chul-hee. And last but not least, from our organizing agency, from the Hans Seidel Foundation Korea, Representative Dr. Bernhard Zelliger is also joining us. So, we will begin our discussion on climate cooperation on the Korean Peninsula and talk about how we can cooperate internationally as well.
As you know well, in terms of responding to climate change, we have to include North Korea in our discussions, and including all of the people here, the 2 Koreas in East Asia and Europe. And going beyond these areas, actually globally, this is a challenge that requires a global response. And at the PyeongChang Peace Forum also, we are talking about peace, but I think peace and climate change also go hand in hand as both important topics, and going beyond COVID-19 situation, not just the 2 Koreas, but multilaterally, what kinds of cooperations are necessary in order to address this issue? That is what I'd like to talk about through my presentation. First of all, let's take a moment to look at the efforts of North Korea against climate. Since 2017, there's been stronger sanctions against the North. And so our cooperation with North Korea, particularly with regards to climate response, we are wondering if these efforts are going on in North Korea. And North Korea is faced with severe economic crisis, and so many people doubt that there are any climate actions going on in North Korea. But very fortunately and paradoxically, in North Korea also, climate actions are ongoing as it is in other countries. So it did ratify the Paris Agreement, and in 2017, North Korea became a member of the IUCN. So the Ministry Ministry of Land and Environment Protection became a member. And in 2018, it joined the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. And it also became a party to the Ramsar Convention. And from the perspective of biodiversity, well, as you know, rather than the developed or advanced countries, it's the developing countries such as North Korea that have the strength in terms of biodiversity-related work. And in 2019, we have GCF, the office is in Songdo, but North Korea designated or received designation of an NTA and national focal point for GCF in 2019. So North Korea, of course, some people may doubt that they are engaging in any concrete actions aside from just becoming members. In fact, there are research and efforts going on. So CTCN, I'm sure you've heard about the Climate Technology Center Network. And North Korea in 2017 gave a proposal to CTCN. And in 2019, it had received approval for its readiness project that it submitted. But in terms of climate response, well, there are some research and network activities, but if you look what's happening in the field in terms of drought or flooding, I mean, these natural disasters are ongoing in North Korea. So let me give you a concrete example. Dr. Thomas and Dr. Zeliger, who are our speakers, have taken these photos. In 2015 in Rason area, there was a major flooding. And as you can see here, there were actually massive damages that occurred. And then in 2017, Dr. Zeliger had taken this photo himself, and he will be giving the details during his presentation later on this flooding. And there was some restoration work that was conducted, and North Korea has come up with some countermeasures against these natural disasters. But as you can see on the photos, well, there was the 2015 flooding, and as part of the restoration work, these facilities have now been rebuilt. But then, when there's a repeat of these natural disasters, what's going to happen to this restoration work? I mean, there are more concerning elements that we can find here in this photo. If you look at the road condition or the fact that there's a mountain behind these facilities, which may lead to landslide. So, with regards to the details, Dr. Lim and Dr. Song will be giving the details during their presentations later on with regards to what measures we can take specifically. Another issue that we need to think about is that, I mean, the discussions about climate, they're ongoing, and needed policies and the technologies, we know what are necessary. But in terms of the victims themselves, those who are directly affected by these natural disasters. I mean, in North Korea, when they take concrete response measures, I mean, should we take a national approach, or does this require a regional, East Asian level response? Or does it require a more local level approach, such as the Gangwon province level approach in which we are here right now? But so I think this requires further discussions about the types of level of responses that is necessary to help North Korea. And the next speaker will be Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choi, for this kind introduction. Thank you very much, Hans Seidel Foundation, for inviting me, and thank you very much to PyeongChang Peace Forum for organizing this meaningful event. Before I start, I really liked how yesterday the moderator of plenary session confused PyeongChang and Pyongyang. She was saying that the New York Orchestra visited Pyongyang, and then they came to PyeongChang, and so on. I think it's a good way, and I hope one day we will be buying ticket to PyeongChang and maybe land in Pyongyang, and I hope we will all gather together in PyeongChang Peace Forum at a certain point. So my name is Tomasz, and I represent Euraccess Initiative. Euraccess is a European Commission program aimed to promote European research area, as a research destination for Korea-based researchers, but also to promote European values, to promote what's the best in Europe, to spread and to enhance European values all over the world. In this capacity, I'm sitting here and will be sharing certain lessons from Europe. And when I do this, I sometimes encounter reactions from my Korean friends here, like, how can you talk about European values here in Northeast Asia? You know, Japan colonized Korea and they didn't apologize. Yes, of course, but let me just emphasize that the history of Europe is the history of war. Nowhere in the world people mastered themselves in annihilating each other. We Europeans really know how to kill each other, how to extinct each other. What Spaniards did to Brits, what Germans did to French, and so on, it's beyond human imagination. So my point is here, two global conflicts started in Europe, and now the European continent is integrated, is unified. Any kind of reconciliation and integration is possible, not because of certain events, but despite certain events. And this is something I would always like to keep in mind while talking about European values here in Northeast Asia. Now, going back to the topic, what's the European role here while addressing climate change and climate issues? First of all, it's difficult to comprehend what EU is, because EU is not a country, it's not a nation state. And in current international world order, nation states are still the most important actors. So it's difficult to position Europe in the global arena. Henry Kissinger once said that, you know, what is Europe? Where shall I call when I want to talk to Europe? Is it Brussels? Is it Berlin? Is it London? Is it Paris? So yes, Europe is not a nation state, but it's the biggest economy in the world. European single market works. Europe controls the second most important currency in the world, and it is the biggest donor to international aid. So it's impossible to ignore Europe as a global actor. So Europe is there. And climate change and climate-related issues were always on the top agenda of Europe and still are. Currently, one of the top priorities of European policies is so-called twin transition, which is digital transition, digitalization, and Green Deal, the European Green Deal, the policy to achieve zero net greenhouse gas emissions until 2050. This is something that European member states transferred to the European Commission in order to solve those issues, in order to forge those policies. And it's not something new. Europe was there from the very beginning. It was in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change since 1990. Europe has always been part of the global discussion on climate change. European Commission was always one of the top actors when addressing those issues. And while Europe was integrating, it always had climate issues and climate change somewhere on the top of their agenda. Kyoto Protocol, first commitment, second commitment, Europe was always there, and European member states were always committed to those solutions developed during those talks. And it was the European Union that constructed the European emission trading schemes. It was the first large greenhouse gas emission trading scheme in the world, and it is still the largest one. While Europe was integrating, member states agreed on an EU-wide cap instead of national caps, meaning that certain policies were again transformed to some supranational government, which EU Commission is. EU member states decided to leave certain authority to something bigger, to something above national governments. And EU reached this goal that was designed by the Kyoto Protocol in 2018 and reduced greenhouse gas emissions by more than 20% comparing to the level of 1990s. And EU emission trading system, the one that is the biggest in the world, it's still working and it's still there. Now, one of the top priorities of the European Union, as I mentioned, the European Green Deal to achieve greenhouse gas emissions net zero production until 2050 is one of the top priorities. And last year, in 2021, in July, the climate law was introduced and published in the official journal of the European Commission. This basically turned political commitment and statement into legal obligations and legal actions that member states must comply with. Now, I mentioned European values. It is important to see that the Republic of Korea's policies and values are actually aligned with the European ones. The European Green Deal is very similar to the South Korean Green Deal announced 2 years ago by the current administration. Also, the aim is to achieve zero net greenhouse gas emissions until 2050. And in this capacity, I truly think that South Korea and the EU could work together, could join forces to reduce climate change, because no one can be left behind, neither North Korea nor South Korea. And here, let me emphasize that EU is actually producing less than 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So while being committed, while having this climate change on the top of agenda, I sometimes feel that EU is fighting somebody else's war. Looking into North Korea, because EU's role in Korean Peninsula, Dr. Choi already mentioned it. North Korea is there, is part of the international organizations and international society. Let's do not reinvent the wheel. Let's use existing organizations, existing commitments, and North Korea is part of it. North Korea is part of Kyoto Protocol and had signed Paris Agreement and do have the national authority, designed national authorities since 2008. As Dr. Choi already mentioned, they do have certain framework, they do have certain infrastructure, political infrastructure to be utilized by the international community and by South Korea as well. Maybe it's not that feasible, but these are North Korean participants to a conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and those in bold. This list is very often criticized by international community that North Koreans did not attend all the COPs. I see it the other way around. The glass is half empty, half full. Maybe they did not attend all COPs, but if you look carefully, the last one was in Glasgow, and it's not here. The last one was affected by COVID, so let's maybe keep it as an outlier. But the two previous ones, in 2018 and 2019, if you look carefully at the affiliation of those officials who attended, they were the real policy makers and decision makers from Pyongyang. Previous COPs were attended by diplomats in the country where COP was held. So basically, they just attended for the sake of attendance. However, two previous COPs, the one in Katowice and Madrid, those were attended by officials from Pyongyang who came all the way around to participate, which means they also have it at the top of their agenda. They care about it. These people were the ones who actually can make a change within North Korean political system and implement policies. And so by looking at the affiliation of those people, I can tell you that North Korea also can address and is addressing climate issues. Only recently, last year in December, North Korea attended a webinar on Asian Sea Is Convention, anyhow, to address green recovery from the oceans, and then they signed MOU together with South Korea and Japan. So they are there. They are part of international system. They are discussing. They are addressing certain issues, and they are ready to be approached. It's not that it's a closed society in the way it is physically closed right now by COVID. So to conclude briefly, without political will, nothing can happen. And we need to seek for cooperation and discussion with North Korea under multilateral arrangement, not to address those issues unilaterally or bilaterally by South Korea, but let's use existing framework of international organizations, of International Union for Conservation of Nature, United Nations, EU Commission, EU as a whole, Let's use the umbrella of international organizations and international nations to address issues that are globally important, not only for the European Union or North Korea, but for the whole world. And I am personally concerned about climate change because this is really existential problem. And sometimes I wonder whether it's not too late. And while personally I am concerned, allow me to quote former US President John Kennedy and use his words that climate change is a problem that was man-made and therefore can be solved by man. And no problem of human destiny is beyond human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Thank you for sharing your opinion, especially status of EU's climate action, and your last word also very emphasized to us. Maybe we can discuss about more things, but I'd like to add more information about the PEMC things. PEMC is a partnership in the environmental management for the Sea of East Asia. North and South Korea delegation normally regularly meet during that partnership. Maybe we can discuss more details later. So 다음으로 그 아시아 앞서
Next,
유럽 케이스에 대해
earlier, Dr. Tamas talked about the European case. Now let's take the Asian perspective, particularly in the mid-latitude region in which the two Koreas are included in. What kinds of cooperation can be made in this mid-latitude region? On this topic, we have Professor Song Chol-ho of the Ojang Resilience Institute who will give the presentation. Good morning. As was just introduced, I am Song Chol-ho. There are activists, there are also those who are working within a network, but for me, I am a researcher and I am working at a school. And so, just a moment, please. I can't see my slides. So I do mostly research, and I'd like to share with you some thoughts that came to my mind as I was conducting the related research. I'd like to begin with an introduction of the Ojang Resilience Institute. So Ojang is the name of the donor to Korea University, and we have the name resilience in our institution. And so resilience has to do with having the ability to recover after being hit by a crisis. And so, seen from the resilience perspective, the climate issue, as we heard earlier, is not a natural disaster, but a man-made crisis. And so, seen from that respect, as we try to find solutions to the climate problem, and of course this is a global issue and there are many different causes, but because of the climate change, there are many adaptation and mitigation efforts that have to be taken by each nation and globally as well. And so, seen from that perspective, when we try to deal with the topic of climate or climate resilience, I think it's important for us to broaden our horizon to try to find case studies and examples that we can benchmark on. So that is a broad perspective that I'd like to take as I begin my presentation. So let me begin with a definition of mid-latitude region. South Korea, the Korean Peninsula, is part of the mid-latitude region, and this is the area around 30 to 60 latitude. And I'd like to focus on the northern hemisphere in which we are at right now. Of course, there's a lot of different ecological zones here. There is the very arid region. The Gobi Desert is also part of the northern hemisphere. This is an area with high population density. And because of that, this region is changing because of the anthropogenic activities that's going on right now. And this is leading to ecological changes as a result. And so, what are the issues that this region is faced with? Let me now talk about that. First of all, what I'm showing you here is the Aral Sea region, and you will see that it was a lake. The Aral Sea was a lake, and you will see that there is a decrease in the water, and there's desertification that's going on, and people had used up the water resources here, and this trend had aggravated because of rising temperature due to climate change. And so there is a lot of land degradation that had happened here. And then if you look at the right side, you will see A and B. And these are future projections about how much desertification will happen. If you look at the mid-latitude region, you will see that the red areas is going to really widen much in the future. And what you see below is the ecological changes that we can expect, the vegetation changes that we can expect in the future. And if you could exclude the desert areas, the pink areas would be where most of the changes occur. And so there's a lot of impact as a result of climate change that's ongoing right now. Now let's talk about the water resources problem. So hydrologically, when there is a flooding that happens or when there is severe drought that occurs, that's going to have very long-term effects. And also for trees and for other living beings, not just humans, water resources is very important. So we're going to see an increase in these water stress or water-related problems. And Korea is suffering from a lot of the yellow dust problem also. And we'll be seeing more of the sandy dust or yellow dust problems happening as a result of the climate becoming drier. And so it's very clear that climate change is bringing about a lot of natural disasters and problems. So we need to take response measures. And of course, there are different approaches available, but since I am an environmental researcher, I think we can begin by looking at the environment and environmental restoration and the economy. So what I'm showing you right now is the area of the forest, as well as the environmental investments and its effect on the GDP. So this is a graph that shows the correlation between the two. And you will see that in terms of GDP people are saying that we need to reduce carbon these days. And the effects on carbon, you will see that there is a clear pattern that is emerging. So there is a high correlation between the two. And similarly, this is a research that we conducted ourselves, is that you will see that there is a decrease in the forest area. And on the right side, you will see that if trees grow well, they will have thicker diameters, thicker trunks. But then that trend is actually also aggravating right now. So in the case of North Korea, you will see that the forest area is declining. But in the case of South Korea, we have had a good maintenance level in terms of our forests. And so economically, the situation between North and South Koreas are clearly different. And so, the economic aspects and its relation to climate and the health issues, how are we going to try to approach the problem, linking the two important areas together. So those are some thoughts that we need to consider. And what you see here is that there is a downward decline of the dots for North Korea, but for South Korea, we are seeing an increase in the forest area, so an upward trend. So we need to consider environmental restoration and also climate change responses at the same time as we consider the economic aspects as well. For North Korea, there are many changes that are happening as a result of climate crisis or climate change. And globally, we saw that there is more land degradation that's happening. It's the same for North Korea as well. So let us try to compare the two Koreas. On the left side, you will see that a lot of the forests are being transitioned to croplands or farmlands. And so because of climate change, the issue of subsistence is becoming more severe or aggravating. And so in the later presentations, we'll be listening more about this, the specificities of this transition. But so these are problems that are happening right now. What are the solutions that we can adopt? What approach should we take? That's what we need to think about. And in terms of the land degradation, I think we have a lot of evidence that it's happening in different places in North Korea. And with the forest degradation, another related problem is the increase in droughts and flooding, which also means that there is less capability to respond to these increase in natural disasters. And these events are being reported through the news agencies. And if you look, this is the Sohung Lake area, and we are seeing the trends. Every time there's a heavy downpour, the amount of water increases, there's flooding. But then during droughts, the amount of water declines also. So these are the existing phenomena that we are observing that's happening in the north. So as we just heard now, there are many problems that North Korea is suffering from, which are also global problems as well with regards to climate. So, and Dr. Cheona did introduce earlier that North Korea has submitted its NDC, and it is part of the CTCN, and it's trying to be active in the climate sphere. And what's interesting here is that if you look at the NDC of North Korea, it has what's called a conditional contribution. So North Korea is willing to reduce its emissions under certain conditions, basically. And also it's going to work on emission reductions in the environment, the forest and the environment areas, and it's focusing on adaptation mostly. But of course, there are conditional conditions that have been met. This just shows that North Korea requires international solidarity, international cooperation, and that can be implemented through specific projects. So now let me talk about the specific projects. I talked about CTCN earlier, but climate technology will be very important. There are a lot of problems that are rising as a result of climate change, and the technology that is applied to try to address these problems are what we call the climate technology. And the CTCN actually helps the developing countries receive that technology and use the technology in the field. So you will see the number of the different project registrations, and this has to do with SDG number 13 and number 7, also number 8, number 9 SDG, which has to do with sustainable production and energy industry. So you will see that most of our projects are concentrated in these specific SDGs. With regards to hunger, food, such as and other SDG 2, 5, 15, 16 issues, yes, they are still relevant, but I think it just shows the current global trends. For the mid-latitude region, countries such as Mongolia, Nepal, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, these countries are included here, Pakistan, Tunisia, and Uzbekistan. There are investments from these countries, but mostly the focus is energy and the agroforestry, water, and industry, carbon fixation, so which basically has to do with low carbon emissions. These are the types of technologies that they want, and these projects are actually, some of them are ongoing. So looking at the situation of the country, I mean, it's important for North Korea, or I think what North Korea is trying to do is try to benchmark other countries that are in a similar situation or globally as well. But seen from technology perspective, so SDG number 7, number 8, or no, the industry-related SDGs, I think these will be the main focus of the projects that North Korea will be carrying out or would want to carry out in the future with regards to food or hunger issues. It's important for us to try to include these other SDGs as part of the big package also. I think that would be the better approach in the future. So biomass, biogas, CCS, and other aspects will be important. Solar energy also, and forestry-related aspects, the water resources. I mean, all of those should be reflected as part of the big package. So we have, that is by observation at least. And when that happens, I think North Korea will be able to have more room to maneuver in terms of participating in the global projects on climate. Ecologically, well, I did mention earlier that with forestry destruction, there's going to be weakening of the capability to respond, so weaker resilience. And there are some technologies that can be used to help with the ecological restoration. And I think the restoration also, you need to think about the economics aspect in the restoration work as well. And to do that, it's important for us to put different aspects, different areas together in a package to make it a cross-cutting approach that is applied through the project. And then I think that will be more helpful for North Korea. And with this, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Song. And what you have mentioned, particularly with regards to climate technology, there are different areas that we can collaborate on. And of course, for policy implementation or reflection, it's important for us to not just talk about it, but we have to use the simulation results as our basis. And in that respect, what Professor Song has mentioned during his presentation will be very helpful in our discussion today. And water, energy, food, in terms of the nexus of the different cross-cutting areas. We're going to now go on to the next presentation by Professor Lim.
So his topic is, well, as you know, nexus and water, energy, and food has to be taken into account. And Dr. Im Chori actually has been conducting research on relevant topics, so he will give his presentation. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Im Chori, as was just introduced. I am with Kookmin University. And today I will talk about climate cooperation in a large sense. Now, the field of climate change, well, academically or from an industrial perspective, I think, well, you can think of the IPCC report chapters. The first chapter is about climate science. So it's about the scientific approach about climate change. And then chapter 2 is about adaptation. How can we adapt to the ongoing climate change? The third chapter, I think, is most important. How can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So this is about mitigation. Now, the first chapter talks about analyzing the current status and also making forecasts about what will happen. The second and the third chapters about how we will respond. So whether it's South Korea, North Korea, or any other country in the international community, in order to respond to climate change, we have to engage in adaptation and mitigation as well. So having said that, well, we've laid out a number of plans, the European New Green Deal, we have Korea's Green New Deal. There has been a lot of efforts for mitigation, especially from the developing countries' perspective, adaptation is another important issue. So we have to think about how we can mix adaptation and mitigation together as we go towards collaboration in this area. So today I'll be talking about mitigation and adaptation strategies of North Korea in the perspective of the Inter-Korean climate cooperation. I will be talking about the technology involved as well. As it was already mentioned by a number of speakers before me, North Korea has been engaging in actions for climate change. It's more proactive than we had anticipated, as it was mentioned before. In 2016, the NDC of the DPRK was announced. And during this process, of course, the numbers are important, but the fact that as a developing country, DPRK submitted its NDC is meaningful. We also have to take note that coal extraction and utilization is something that North Korea really has to work on. Coal and other minerals, these are very important for North Korea. The exports of these resources are important, but North Korea has touched upon the fact that it will work towards reducing the use of these minerals and coal in order to reduce the emissions that lead to climate change. So, as it was mentioned by Professor Song, there has been a number of climate change phenomena that we can see in North Korea. For example, there has been floods and droughts. And I do believe that these type of climate changes can be seen throughout the Korean Peninsula. But when it comes to the vulnerability and the exposure, I think that North Korea is relatively more hard hit than South Korea. And so I think that the damages are really felt vividly by the people of North Korea. And if you look at the recent statistics, around the world, North Korea was ranked as, in some statistics, number 3 when it comes to the natural disasters that are experienced by countries. So adaptation for North Korea is something that we have to continue to focus on. So then what kind of technology does North Korea need? As it was mentioned by Dr. Song and Dr. Che, North Korea submitted its NDC. And if you look at the NDC, you can find some conditional contribution proposals. The conditional contributions include a number of technologies. North Korea wants to receive technological support, and if such technology is supported, North Korea is saying that it can reduce more. Among these technologies, well, most of them are technologies that South Korea can actually provide because we have the technological capacity. But when it comes to the nuclear power plants, of course, that's included. But aside from that, I think that the other technologies are areas that South Korea can cooperate with North Korea on, because these are not such high-tech or difficult technologies to support and provide. What about the case of South Korea? Now, climate technology has been greatly advanced. It has been developing over the years and has reached a certain level. Compared to advanced countries such as the US and the European Union, if you compare the technology capacity that we have, well, we sometimes say that our technology level is about 70%, 80%, or 90% of the technology capacity of the US or the EU. But we do also say that we have reached a certain threshold. So we do hold a certain level of technology capacity. And we have had a number of collaboration efforts, especially with the EU, and that has led our climate technology to further advance. As you can see on this screen, we also have we have the online information platform for climate technology, and we have the different ministries related to science and technology. We also have the Green Technology Center and KIST. And through these agencies, we have continuously worked on developing and advancing our technology. So I do believe that Korea has the technological capacity to work with and support North Korea. Another point I would like to make is that there has been a recent act implemented in Korea. It's known as the Climate Change Response Technology Development Promotion Act. So it's not just the technology capability that we have advanced, but also we have laid the legislative and institutional foundation as well. So we call this the Climate Technology Act in short. And the Act defines the different technologies and also how we can utilize these technologies in detail. I do believe that, of course, we will need further amendment of this Act, but this Act will lay the legislative and institutional foundation for us to continue to drive forward our technological advancement, and it also shows Korea's commitment to this issue of climate change. Now, we have had other legislations about climate change, but I think that this is the first time that we have put into place a law for climate technology. So this has been an improvement and advancement for South Korea. So we are making the preparations to further advance our climate technology. We are building up our technological capacity to cooperate, not only technology-wise, but also institutionally. So I explained about that. Then how are we going to collaborate? We have adaptation technology, we have mitigation technology, but what is a window that we will utilize to work with North Korea? I think that that is really important. So here I show you a diagram, and this is something that was presented by our research team. It's a proposal that we made, and Dr. Thomas and other speakers touched upon this, but we believe that multilateral cooperation is very important. So bilateral cooperation can be limited at this moment. For dealing with the climate change agenda, I do believe that international cooperation and international agreements are very important. So we need to collaborate with the global community. We need multilateral arrangements. That would be the way to promote collaboration. We need multinational collaboration. So, for example, the UNFCCC has been the cornerstone of these relevant agreements, and we do believe that these types of international arrangements can serve as a foundation for cooperation with North Korea. Of course, we can utilize our technology, but we can utilize organizations such as the GCF, for example, for supporting North Korea financially. And another thing that we should think about is a bilateral cooperation between the South Korean government and the North Korean regime. We don't know when that can take place, but if such bilateral collaboration can take place, we will have to think about how we are going to carry out such bilateral cooperation. Perhaps the Ministry of Unification can play the role of a control tower so that we can support technological support and collaboration. So that was one idea that we had suggested. And this is case one. Now, we showed you the conditional contribution list of North Korea. There is demand for certain technologies. North Korea has proposed that since we are in such and such situation, we need such and such technology. North Korea has been sending out such signals. So based on that, South Korea can provide the relevant technologies. And I believe that that would be the most effective way forward for North Korea to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also to collect and store. I think that we also have to, while helping North Korea carry this out, we have to help North Korea to continue to preserve its natural environment. That way, there can be positive impact on deterring natural disasters. There can be these types of co-benefits. So having said that, I think that in order to enhance the quality of life of the North Korean people, we have to have co-cooperation projects. For example, energy and forest co-cooperation can be carried out. South Korea has a lot of expertise and experience on these types of projects, so I think that South Korea can help North Korea in this direction. Also, South Korea has a number of adaptation technologies, and especially last year, or was it 2 years ago, South Korea for the first time in the world launched the environment satellite on the sky orbiting around the Korean Peninsula. There is this environmental satellite that is collecting environment-related information, climate-related information, and we're conducting environment monitoring. And the information that we capture includes the information about North Korea. Of course, satellites can be a very sensitive issue, but if we use this from an environmental perspective or use it for tackling the issue of climate change, I think that this can be a valuable resource that we can use in cooperating with North Korea. Also, we have a lot of analytical technology based on the data that we have collected, and this is part of our adaptation technology. So, the evaluation assessment technology using the data that we've collected enables us to be able to use our technology without actually having to go into North Korea, actually going into the field. So this kind of a data-based approach actually can help North Korea mitigate its natural disasters that has been stemmed from climate change. So this is all that I have prepared. Thank you for your attention. And Dr. Che? Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Lim. So Dr. Chori Lim, he talked about the window for cooperating with North Korea. He presented case 1 and case 2, and he also touched upon the technologies that South Korea has and how we can transfer such technology to North Korea. I do believe that further discussion will be required on this, and perhaps our last speaker can touch upon this.
Dr. Zaliger will talk about the experience of ongoing projects, cooperation with North Korea despite COVID situation. So he's going to give us a new perspective. So now, Dr. Zaliger, your presentation, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here, but I'm a little bit worried. The topic of this conference is peace here and now. But now you go out of this session in half an hour and you will say all very nice words. South Korea can provide this, South Korea can provide that, we could cooperate here and there. But North Korea doesn't want. It will not happen. And that's the same with all the other sessions. We can talk about sports cooperation, about culture, about green détente. Wonderful proposals, but it simply doesn't work. What can we do that it happens here and now? It's very, very difficult, but I want to focus on this question, how we can come to an arrangement which would work now. It's not an arrangement which is very pleasant for the South Koreans, because basically it means they have to fund it, but they don't get the credit. That's the only way, I think. Before doing so, I would just very shortly stress once more that we talk about man-made problems, which Professor Wieczbowski said, and these problems are not all climate change. North Korea loves climate change because very often in North Korean newspapers you read, due to climate change we have droughts and we have floods and it gets hot and it gets cold, but it's not true. Much of what happens in North Korea is a problem which is not only man-made, but which is a domestic problem. Deforestation being the biggest issue there, but also some others. And like the Aral Lake dried out because of all the dams they built before and all the water they spread to have cotton industries in Central Asia. And similarly, it's not a thing of some industries far away. And similarly, in North Korea, we often talk really about domestic problems too. We should know that, because then we can answer it. Still, I believe that the climate change framework and the SDG framework is very important, because North Korea can agree to it, and it doesn't sound so harsh. Instead of saying, due to our policy, which was really, really bad in the last 30 years, we have to make a change. Instead, you say, okay, climate change. Now I will skip all of my presentation besides this last point, I'm sorry, I have to once go through it because all of this had been mentioned before. I'm very happy for you to have done so. So the only thing I want to talk about is one thing, the prehistory of cooperation. I don't know, some of you seem to be even too young for that to remember, but in the 2000s we had these projects called Clean Development Mechanism projects. They were projects basically that in a developing country, a project could be started. In North Korea, it were hydropower dams mainly, but it could be a wastewater facility, it could be carbon capture from coal mines or whatever. And this was certified by the UNFCCC. For this, emission rights were given out and they could be traded basically on the European exchange for that, on the European market. And North Korea started in 2008 to think about it. Unfortunately, they were very, very slow because it's a quite complex project. It's not just saying we have no emissions, now give me the money, but they have really to certify it. They have to put all their data on the internet, and it took them 2 or 3 years to start project. And then they started 8 so-called CDM projects, which worked, which were registered at UNFCCC and are still there. And these projects were all small-scale to mid-scale hydropower dams. None is bigger than 20 megawatts. So we really talk about peanuts in the international framework. The problem was they started, as I said, really in 2010 with these projects and were finished by 2012. But in that time, the carbon market in Europe changed completely. While when they started, they were thinking of a carbon price of 20 euro per ton. When they ended, it was somewhere less than €1, I think even sometimes in the 20-cent range. And that meant the price was not attractive for them anymore. Because to get the emissions certified, you needed to have an international team coming from an international audit company like TÜV or Norske Veritas. They were very expensive experts, so they really couldn't do. So when they ended, there was no more way to sell the emissions profitably. That was still before sanctions. And the second problem came up then, there was actually in the UN a debate about that, and all states, including that time South Korea and Japan and the US, decided, yes, North Korea can do these climate projects, can make money out of its new hydropower dams. It's not against the sanctions as they were of 2012. But with the new sanctions package of 2016, also that is gone. And that's very deplorable because now, due to the new rules, carbon prices shot up again. And they are again in a very, very attractive range. I don't know if we see that here. Here you see the carbon price development in Europe. And you see when they, where's this dot? Okay. That's where, when they started, we were high up. When they finished, we were here in the true, where it didn't make sense, and now they shot up again. So North Korea could make actually a lot of money off its carbon prices. It's that one I will show you later. So we have CDM projects in North Korea, and they work the following way. That's important. Not the developing country works alone, but it always needs a partner in the European Union. Here you see for these projects, it's a Czech company, a very small one, called Topic Energo, which is actually the holder or receiver of the CER. They are the ones who will sell them on behalf of the North Koreans. It doesn't work from the country alone. Now, currently, North Korea has, I think, 400,000 CER, certified emission rights. They are not profitable from them, I said, but they decided to have at least one round of certification to show their government it's possible to do so. So they have these, but they cannot sell them anymore because of sanctions. Now, how can this lead to a new policy which here and now will immediately be available for Korea as an inter-Korean carbon trade community? Korea itself has its own carbon market. That was a slide I just skipped here. And it had always very attractive prices because Korea, differently from the EU, from the beginning said, okay, we want this carbon trade to really to affect the companies, while in the EU in the beginning there was this idea, on the one hand, EU always wants everything. So on the one hand they wanted to reduce carbon emissions, but they didn't want to hurt their industry. So here we were now up to 40,000 won per ton of CO2, and now we are somewhere in the 20,000 to 30,000 range, which is a very, very attractive price for a ton of carbon reduction. So how can it work in the inter-Korean community? If we allow a foreign company, let's say Topic Energo, or there was a company in Great Britain, but it can be whoever, to carry out environmental projects in North Korea, that's possible, to get accreditation for them, and to sell these in the South Korean carbon market. It would mean Korean companies don't have to invest in Peru or in Iran or maybe Afghanistan or Bangladesh or wherever in the world to get carbon credits, which they need because they produce too much domestic carbon, but they can do it in North Korea. They are not necessarily on the ground there. Even the North Koreans don't need to know it in the beginning. Or let's say, like with most of these projects, the North Koreans could feign ignorance. They could presuppose it doesn't really matter. We get our carbon credits and get the benefits from it, and where they are sold, it's not our part. That could work. I would be quite sure it will work. Clearly, there is a sanctions issue. For the time being, it could be overcome in not paying out money to the North Koreans, but let's say doing barter agreements. For example, bringing in food supplies, whatever North Korea needs, because the sanctions until now, at least in theory, are sanctions which are not there to strangle the North Korean economy. In practice, it's a little bit different. If you talk to American policymakers, they don't like that North Korea makes money out of anything. But you could say these projects could allow North Korea to import large amounts of goods which they don't have to pay for. I'm sure they would go for that. That would be the first step. And then the legal preconditions which had to be changed here would only be that these projects are accepted in the South Korean national carbon trading system. That could be done by a majority in the parliament. It would not be a big deal. You simply say, if these projects fulfill these and these certification conditions, we accept them, like we accept international projects. The third party would do the accreditation. That is not the South Koreans. And then we had North Korean projects in the South Korean carbon trading system. Why should Korea do so? There would be a number of reasons you could think about. First of all, you would reduce environmental problems in North Korea. These carbon projects, they could be afforestations, they could be energy projects, clean energy projects, they could be energy efficiency projects. Everything of this is eligible. Basically, along the lines which were shown before with this NDC also, and all these research which Ojang did on what is necessary in North Korea. All of this could be done, could be certified, could be then get an issued carbon reduction, and could be sold in the South Korean market. In the mid to long term, if conditions get better then, we could get a direct involvement of South Korean companies, but we wouldn't need it. And that would mean really it would be immediately possible. So if you think of Korean Peninsula as one, if you say we are not South Korea a country, but we are Korea a country, then it would make sense to say, even if we don't get the moral credit for it, even if the North Koreans maybe don't even know that we are financing their environmental projects, it's still good to do them, because it will improve the environment of our country. Not of North Korea, a different country, but of our country, Korea. So that's how an inter-Korean carbon trade community could work now. I'm not sure if it happens. I guess politicians wouldn't like it because there would be no more control by Tongelbu. Sorry, I like the Tongelbu, and they are our close partner, but I think they control too much of that. I don't like them as control tower, to be honest. They control too much for the last 40 years or 50 years. We wouldn't have any big signs and posters. This has been done by South Korean company. This has been financed by KEPCO. This has been financed by K-Water. Nothing of that would happen. But the environment in North Korea would improve. Not sure if you are up to this challenge, but it's something really to think about, because we often think about what would happen if the North Koreans accept our help. And we have a lot of money. Think of the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund, 1 billion won. Since 20 years, every year, there's 1 billion won which is never spent. 1 billion won, sorry, $1 billion, US dollar, which is never spent. And we could use that. We could do something in North Korea now, but not by waiting for North Korean cooperation, but just through this third-party model. And it's a little bit similar with the international organization model. That the bilateral thing is nice to have, and it's the best, clearly, to have in the long run, but it simply will not happen. So I really ask you to think about a more practical approach for that. And we need really a cooperative approach, but not one which is boasting and saying, oh, we are the South Korean, we have all the technology, we come and rescue you. The North Koreans won't accept it. Capacity building, and that's the next point, can be done now. We are preparing with good partners, actually also in the field of carbon trade, our next capacity building online seminar. It's possible with North Korea nowadays. Capacity building abroad, scholarships for students, all this would be ways to support the message. But to have a non-political sphere where South Korea just is issuer of or donor of money and receiver then of CERs would be, in my opinion, probably the best way to come to a massive cooperation in the field of environment now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaliga. As you mentioned, that it's very difficult to network with North Korea and the real happening, or even the carbon trade system. But as you know, we are waiting. And I know my colleague normally say the meeting after meeting, we can make a trust. We are ready to trust. In the world on the Korean Peninsula for 2 Koreas, and also one of the as South Korean, we work for the more things, and we try to make a peace here and now. That's why we are here today. 이어서 저는 그 송철호 교수님과 임철희 교수님께 먼저 좀 더 추가적으로
I would like to give an opportunity for Dr. Song and Dr. Lim to respond, and also I would like to hear opinions from the floor, because we just heard from Dr. Zaliga and the ETS that he mentioned, Korea's ETS, and utilizing that. Well, this can be connected with Korea's ESG approach as well. And also, for the least developed country red project perspective, perhaps Dr. Song and Dr. Lim, since you have researched these topics, perhaps you can touch upon this, and perhaps a proposal or the suggestion made by Dr. Zaliga. I would like to hear your thoughts on how we can apply the technologies that South Korea has, and whether this suggestion is feasible in your views. Can we utilize the KETC in cooperating with North Korea? Please go ahead.
I'd like to begin first. At the Glasgow meeting, specifically with regards to the carbon market, there was the NDC Paris Agreement that was concluded, and the 2050 net zero goal was set. And so there's a lot of driving force that has been established, and internationally also through CDM there's a transition from CDM to SDM, Sustainable Development Mechanism. So I think the overall market as a result is being affected because of this transition. And as I mentioned earlier, most of the projects, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's packaging, which includes the infrastructure, or whether it has to do with mitigation, adaptation, in forestry or other areas. If you look at the UN CDM registered method or our other offset projects from South Korea, we have all of these methodologies and approaches that are available. They are all linked to climate issues. Globally also, there are more flexible approaches stemming from new technology development that can be considered. So with regards to the credit issuance and utilization, yes, I believe that there is a good possibility that these projects can be quite successful. And I think now we should begin with the preparatory work. So there's a possibility, high possibility in terms of issuing the credits. But then ultimately, we cannot avoid the political issues as well, or the carbon reduction accreditation. How should we go about that process? I think those negotiations will eventually have to be dealt with. As of now, there's still stumbling blocks along this path. So the fact that in terms of the global goal of reaching net zero, I mean, we're seeing a strengthening of this drive, strengthening of the commitment towards these goals. So seen from that broad perspective, in terms of being a responsible member of the global community, yes, South Korea indeed will be affected as well. And so seen from that perspective, yes, there's a good possibility that these projects can begin with formal discussions and then eventually be implemented. So this is certainly an approach that we should be thinking about positively and we should be taking action on.
Yes, if I may add my thoughts. Well, Dr. Gallagher touched upon the issue of inter-Korean cooperation and utilizing the KETS. Now, I think that this would be the best case scenario. But as it was mentioned, there's the legal and institutional matters that we have to consider. So how are we going to overcome those relevant challenges is something that we have to think about. Not only that, if you look at the Korean market, it's not a stable trading market. So I think that we have to further stabilize the market and also advance the trading market in order for us to use it for our collaboration with North Korea. I talked about the climate technology, and these technologies can be applied to North Korea that could lead to credit, and also the Korean corporations can participate, and that can be a virtuous cycle. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your very good remarks. I think that starting from 10 years ago, the emissions trading system, utilizing this along with the capital market had been something high on the list of people's expectations. People had high expectations for utilizing the emissions trading system. However, there are unexpected events, for example, COVID-19. So there are uncertainties, and we have to consider the uncertainties when trying to utilize the trading system. I think that this is a great idea. It's a good approach, but perhaps we also have to consider some of the unexpected uncertainties that may delay this type of an approach. If you look at the emissions trading market and the current situation, we can think about that. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Lim and Dr. Song.
In fact, there are different perspectives that we are taking in the discussions. But I think what we need to focus on right now, or the biggest consideration, is our priorities, where we should begin at the moment. So, in fact, our representative often uses the term calm down, but he also says you can do it. So whether it has to do with the ETS, utilization or ETS, I mean, I believe that calm down and you can do it. That spirit should be applied in these cooperation that we are seeking with North Korea. So climate technology projects if we're going to begin with North Korea right now.
December of 2019, just before the corona condition, and you visited every time, annually or regularly visited North Korea, and then you contact with carbon people in North Korea. What's the first stage or first step for real climate cooperation?
Communication.
Sorry, communicate.
Of course,
Yes.
of course, communication. We should engage them, as Dr. Zeliger mentioned, online. We should start to discuss any potential further cooperation by talking to them, by proposing them things online. It's possible, it's feasible. We do have communication channel open with North Korean partners, and we can propose them directly what could be done in a post-COVID world. I would like to add one comment to Dr. Zeliger's suggestion on ETS and so on, and under current sanctions regime. I think it's important, it wasn't mentioned. There is a sanction exemption mechanism. There is a 1718 UN committee, and companies or actors can apply for sanction exemption, and even under current regime, it's possible to do something after getting sanction exemption. It should be also considered.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And Dr. Zeliger, could you give your comment as well?
Well, on that one, clearly it is the sanction exemption is important for example, technology you introduce to North Korea. There would be no problem. Climate technologies, broadly understood, let's say things regarding energy efficiency or renewable energies or so. But you will not get a sanctions exemption for paying them in money for CER. That is, I mean, the real attractiveness of the CDM project was basically they built a hydropower plant, they had local energy, and at the same time they got for them a lot of money. It was globally, it was peanuts, but they, let's say for one hydropower plant, they could maybe over a 10-year period make $1 million or $2 million, which was a lot of money for them. That doesn't work anymore. For that one, we would have to find a barter agreement and say, since the CER is not really held by the state, but by the foreign cooperation partner, European cooperation partner, that cooperation partner makes money, and this money is not directly transferred to North Korea, but it's transferred in form of goods, for example. That was what I meant. And also to the Professor Song and Lim, naturally, if I say we can do it immediately, it's a hyperbole, I know. But the North Koreans did a verification. They did let the TÜV Nord in, they did let the Norske Veritas in, they did everything for the CDM projects which was necessary. They can do so, and it's for Korea. Basically, you only have to give them specifications, like you do for the companies here. You say a project is accepted if it fulfills this and this and this and this conditions. The North Koreans will do so. I'm very, very sure, because we saw it in the CDM project. It was very difficult for them. They didn't have regular internet access. The UNFCCC met every month that time and made almost every month very important changes in the guidelines, and we printed it out and brought it to them. But in the end, they started, I think, with 10 projects and 8 were registered. That is a very good quota, because we have other countries like China or which have much better access to technology, much better advisors, and they get much less as a quota registered. Clearly, these are also small-scale projects, and they were rather simple. They had others. They had projects on biogas with this PyeongChang or Taedonggang. They had a project on small-scale afforestation project. They are in the pipeline, so to speak. But these projects could, with very small changes, also be directly adapted to the South Korean trading system. I'm quite sure of that they are capable.
Thank you, Dr. Zeliger. But before, actually, our session is until 11:30. But I want to ask to our organizer, can we extend the 10-minute for this session? Please confirm that later. And also, I'd like to invite the floors. If you have any questions, please raise your hands.
서울에서 온 한국 청년.
Yes, I am from Seoul. I am the head of the Youth Environmental Association. Now, thank you very much for your remarks.
남자 청년 입장에서
Now, from a male youth, a Korean male youth, I would like to say that usually we have to serve our military service. This is mandatory. And when we serve our military service, we learn from the military that North Korea is our main enemy. And also, we hear that North Korea, when they're right before our eyes, they smile, but actually they're planning war. That's what we are educated during our military service. So now we talk about cooperation with North Korea in terms of climate issues. And I think that I do believe that there will be a circumstance or a situation where we have no choice but to work with North Korea, for example, a crisis situation. But at this moment, do we really have to cooperate with North Korea, with the North Korean youth at this moment? Do we really need that? And also, Dr. Jolliger said that the issue in North Korea, rather than natural disasters, you can say that some are man-made disasters, the floods, the droughts. So those are actually the issue, the problem of North Korea. But the youth in South Korea don't really vividly feel the problem, the challenge. And we think, perhaps, what is a justification for having to help North Korea? So that is my question. What is a justification? Why do we need to help them? And also, now, the climate issue, not only the climate issue, but also from a diplomatic perspective. I think that when we provide the climate infrastructure to North Korea, what would be the corresponding result? For example, what I'm trying to say is after, for example, the Panmunjom project, we had the liaison office that we built, but North Korea blew that up. It was exploded. And that was something, a unilateral action by North Korea. So in climate change, if we cooperate with North Korea, we send technology, we support them. But in the end, there could be a result that's not that positive. And that kind of thinking is based on our past experience. So you talked about the history of EU, the history of war. But when you look at the inter-Korean relationship, the history, how can we restore our trust? Can you give the example of Europe? How did you restore your trust? So rather than paying back through war, we have to build that trust that something good for North Korea is good for South Korea as well. I think that that kind of sentiment is required among the Korean people in order for us to support and work with North Korea. Are there any further questions?
If not, to the four panelists up on the stage, I'd like to give you a chance to answer this question. So what effect, what benefit can South Korea receive from cooperating with North Korea, particularly for the future generations, the younger generation? So how can we change their mind? So Professor Lim, Professor Song, since you are working in schools, you can also share your answers. And also with regards to Dr. Thomas will be talking about this from the climate change perspective. And also, so climate change, cooperation with North Korea. But as I mentioned, it's not an inter-Korean issue only. This has to do with life community, ecological community, and the global community issues. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Zeliger.
Okay, first of all, really thank you very much. It's very, very important perspective, because that is true. If there's no consensus in South Korea, you shouldn't start with it. And maybe it shows already that, yeah, the unification policy of the last decades was not the right one, because on the one hand, you are enemies, on the other hand, you are friends. On the other hand, I myself come from East Sankatlok. When I was young, our enemy was East Germany. We didn't call it the main enemy, but in East Germany there were 500,000 Soviet soldiers, and there were, I don't know, 400,000 East German soldiers. And I was in the West German army that time. But I also had my relatives in East Germany. They were not my enemies. The problem is really that you lack this continued contacts. I'm not sure where your family comes from, but there are probably many of you, or some of you, whose family came from Wonsan or Hamhung or Pyongyang. But you don't know it anymore. You don't know your relatives anymore. That's a tragic, maybe. But as Professor Witzbowski said, and will say again, I'm sure, you can overcome that. And just to the very practical point of view, as I said, if you do now invest in North Korea, in environmental projects, it will first of all save you cost later after a unification, which one day hopefully will be there. Second of all, you could even have benefits now if you think of water cooperation, people who die in Gyeonggi province because North Korea releases water. There would be certain forms of benefits which would be immediate. If North Korean forests were all afforested like South Korean, probably it would do also very well for your climate in the south here now. But I'm sure, I have to admit, if there's no consensus, but then skip the Tongilbu and say nothing anymore about unification. Then you have to say, okay, you are a different state, we are a different state. I'm not sure if the South Koreans want to do that.
May I? Yes, just as a background, I also teach at one of the universities in Seoul, undergrads, and we have those discussions about international cooperation, about international engagement, and it is interesting to see how male students are different after military service. And for the lack of a better term, I'm sorry to use this word, but it's a brainwash. You are brainwashed in military service not to like and not to engage with North Korea. I can see how first year, second year students became different when they returned from the military service, but that's not the point. Don't we have moral obligation to do so? I mentioned European values, and look at the Republic of Korea's economy, how rich you are, how robust you are, how free you are, how democratic you are, how liberal you are. Don't you feel as a global citizen that we have moral obligation? It's according to our standards, it's a norm. Don't we have to help them, engage with them? And you asked about European case, where to start and how to start. I encourage all of you to look into Helsinki process. Helsinki conferences, Helsinki negotiations. It was the first real reapproachment in 70s when East approached Western Hemisphere, asked about discussion about culture, religion, environment, everything that is non-political. Because now the international community, also the Republic of Korea, looks at North Korea and see nuclear weapon program, human rights abuses. Let's cross the bridge when we get there. Let's start with things that can be done. Carbon trade systems, environmental projects. These non-political, feasible, on-the-ground, small things can later become something larger and can create a framework for better cooperation and for more engagement. And I'm not pro unification. Korea's, they don't have to unify. If you look at the history of Korea and the Peninsula, it was almost as long divided as unified, Shilla, Korea, and so on. You don't have to unify, but you can live as two Koreas in the international system and cooperate on things that are important, like climate change.
네, 송철호 교수님 부탁드리겠습니다.
Professor Song, please go ahead.
네, 어떻게 보면은 되게 어려운
Well, in a
질문이기도 하고
sense, it's a difficult question. And to give you an answer to that, I have to talk about my personal experience as well. I am a relatively young researcher in the research community in Korea right now. I also serve in the military. And so looking back at my experience, looking at the Cheonanam or the Yeonpyeong shelling incident, I also had those similar thoughts. So, I worked overnight, defending and, along the barbed wire. So I do get irritated sometimes when I think about North Korea because of this experience. So I also think, why is it that we have to sacrifice so much for North Korea? And these things have happened before, and they're going to continue to happen in the future. But what I feel as I began my research on North Korea was that I'm sensing some change in my thought right now. It changed my mindset. First of all, the fact that South
물론 이제 뭐 희생당하신 분들도 있고
Well,
안타까운 사건 정말 많습니다.
South Korea is actually a very strong country, particularly in the international community. We have great economic power, and we are now a member of the OECD DAC. We are a donor country now. And so, seen from that perspective, cooperating with North Korea on climate issues or other specific issues, yes, there is that need because we do have that responsibility as an advanced country in the world. And so, of course, we can collaborate with countries that we are on good terms with diplomatically, but then I think we also have to cooperate with North Korea because that is part of our responsibility as a member of the global community. And there's some people who use the term the climate devil or climate evil, but anyhow, we have to really have some kind of a mindset shift now. And secondly, because of COVID, North Korea is completely isolated from the international community. But anyhow, during my research, what I realized was that our rivers, we have a huge shared river system with North Korea. So there are some river systems actually from South Korea that flows up and flows down once again. So seen from that perspective, if we're going to deal with our own climate issues also, when we have heavy rain, for example, there's going to be a lot of sand and mud flowing down to South Korea from North Korea. And that is going to adversely affect South Korean people ultimately. And so I think along with those climate issues or environmental issues, the pandemic or the infectious diseases also is another issue that we need to think about. The bird, for example, or the wild boars moving from North Korea to South Korea. So we have to think about those other environmental aspects. So we are putting in a lot of investments in the quarantine measures and other anti-epidemic measures. So if there is some kind of a harmonious cooperation method that we can seek, that we can find with North Korea, it would be good for us to apply those as well. Dr. Lim?
Yes. Now, all of the speakers and all of the participants here today, I think that most of you has a positive view about working with North Korea. That is why probably all of the three speakers talked about the reasons, the positive reasons that we have to collaborate with North Korea. And I myself also believe that is a way to go. But of course, I think that the young people might have diverse views. We are citizens of now an advanced country. Korea has become an advanced country. And now Korea is a donor country. We're sharing with the world. But if you think about it, North Korea is the only country in this world that shares the same language and the exact same culture. And I think that we really have to include North Korea. We have to think about inclusiveness. Now, unification, education. Kookmin University actually is a leading educational institution in Korea, designated by the government for unification education. But we really have to, when we think about why do we have to cooperate, we have to cooperate because, first of all, pragmatic issues. Let's think about climate change. We have the technology, but I don't think that just applying the technology to South Korea alone would lead to the benefits that we really want, because we really have to create the value, the benefits, and for that we have to transfer the technology outside of Korea. That is the best way to make value. The closest country to South Korea is North Korea, geographically, culturally, and also linguistically. So that is why we have to work with North Korea. Of course, there are risks, as we have experienced with the Kaesong Complex project, but I do believe that our technology actually can go to North Korea. There is a market there for our technology as well. That is another perspective. So We also talked about carbon credit. That's another reason that we have to cooperate. Most of the other cooperations can be just unilateral support provided from south to the north. But when it comes to climate change cooperation, when we provide technology, we can win economic credits. So it's a field where we can gain something as well. That might be one reason that I might add to persuade you. And another reason is that we have to think about the future value of our land. If you look at the Korean Constitution, our land is the entire Korean Peninsula. So we have the obligation to protect our entire land, the entire Korean Peninsula. It's our obligation. When will unification take place? Do we need unification? People ask these questions. But regardless of that, we really have to prepare ourselves. I think that is the attitude that we need. Yes, thank you very much, Professor. So today we have heard from 4 speakers.
And we really appreciate the participants who have stayed until the end. Ultimately, the importance of education is what we need to think about again. SEPA, communication, education, public awareness. Fortunately, on SEPA, all 4 speakers and their agencies are doing that work already. Particularly in the Untitled Chapter, we are providing civic education programs, and I'm sure that you can gain access to information about our programs later on. And we conducted this partner session at the PyeongChang Peace Forum, and we appreciate Kang Ye-ri and to the technology team and to the translators. So we really appreciate your assistance. And fortunately, from 2020, we have been participating in the PPF, and there were a lot of bird names that we used during our sessions previously, but then in our sessions, today the light-vented and other different bird names, we did not use those during our session today, so which the translators would appreciate. So, and in the future, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities that we can think about, and this requires continuous discussion. And I believe that this is just the start. And in the next session, partner session 11, we're going to look into Myanmar and Ethiopian situation. We look forward to your participation there as well. With this, we'd like to conclude partner session 8 on climate cooperation on the Korean Peninsula with the international network. Thank you very much.